Cannabis Mediation Basics with Mediator Joseph George, part of the series Mediations on Air with Joseph Matrix George. That is our topic for today.
Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent.
Hey everyone, this is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas, and now visiting my good friend and business partner, Natalia, in Warsaw, Poland.
So this is precisely where I am, and I am an advocate, mediator, and arbitrator here in Warsaw, Poland, and my name is Natalia Łowska-Czajka.
And my name is Joseph George. I'm a mediator, arbitrator, and negotiator in Jacksonville, Florida.
All right, Joseph. So welcome back. We are here now to talk a little bit more about your special niche, okay, called cannabis mediation, okay? The mediation of, let's call it what it is, a controlled substance, all right? A drug that in many parts of the country is still partly illegal for use. However, it's flourishing. It's a plant that grows all over the world. And the US, state by state and federally, there's different regulations and laws. But when conflicts arise involving marijuana, involving cannabis, and how disputes are to be settled, when conflicts arise, sometimes parties find themselves in court, and sometimes they find themselves in a mediator's office. So we wanted to have you on so you can talk a little bit about what cannabis mediation is and why it's important, what you do. Could you give us a little bit of an introduction to cannabis mediation per se, please?
So cannabis mediation is where we actually in detail work with the cannabis community to help resolve the disputes that they have. The cannabis industry has its own unique disputes that arise similar to other industries, but with them, some cases can't go to court because cannabis is still considered a Schedule I substance. So therefore, some cases, the court system won't even hear the cases, or sometimes if they do hear the case, sometimes some judges will throw the case out. So therefore, that's where the ADR, alternative dispute resolution, comes into play in the cannabis industry, whether it's mediation, arbitration, or negotiation. These tools actually aid the cannabis industry in resolving their dispute.
And good to have Mac by my side. Normally we're just on, so I wanted also to say that, but I also want to come back to that. So how is it possible, Joseph, that you can't really have this, or you risk going to court, that your case on cannabis will not be heard, will be just dismissed. And on the other hand, when you have a mediation or arbitration, it will have a binding resolution. So you will have a binding mediation agreement, and you will have a binding arbitration judgment or arbitration resolution. How is it possible?
So the answer to your first question, when the cases go to court, depending on the amount or what they're going to court for, let's say it's somewhat of a case over $1 million, then that means some cases would go to the federal courts. Well, as long as it's still considered a Schedule I substance, the federal court would not hear the case because that's kind of like the federal court is endorsing it. So some cases that smaller can go to some state courts, and the state courts, again, it depends on the state that you're in. And I don't want to get too deep into that because giving any advice, I don't want people to take it as a particular advice to go out and say, well, you know, I said this and said that. But some states, some things, again, would be heard and not heard, and some things could go into small claims versus going to litigation. So, and that's where the gray areas get, because even some judges and lawyers are still trying to figure this network of laws for the cannabis industry. So the laws are so new. Congress and all is still passing laws. Some states is going ahead and passing their own definition of the law, or what we call their own interpretation of what the law is. So it gets tricky for even seasoned lawyers. It gets a little bit tricky for them. That's where mediation or arbitration comes into play, because the parties get to deal with somebody who understands the cannabis industry and understand the nature of their dispute. So if they could aid them in resolving their dispute. If it's arbitration, what they're doing is they're allowing someone to actually pass judgment on their particular case, which will become binding. If you're doing binding arbitration, because there's two parts of arbitration. One is binding, one is non-binding. Sometimes if it's binding, then that means that the both parties agree to the outcome of the award that's presented by the arbitrator. If it's non-binding, then the parties has come to agreement that whatever the arbitrator said, they either could take what the arbitrator says and be founded on it, or they could move on in their separate ways and say, you know what, you was right, I was wrong, let's move on, let's move past this. When it comes to mediation, now we actually assisting the parties in coming strategically to a resolution. So on the confines of mediation has its own confine where we're actually bound by certain ethical rules that we only could do so much in mediation versus arbitration. And that's why there's another leg on it, which is negotiation. When you're doing a negotiated settlement, you're actually working with both parties to come up with strategic solutions to help them resolve the dispute, because negotiation has a wider array, an arm to do a lot more than mediation or arbitration.
So just to be clear, you're highlighting the three different types of conflict resolution that you could use to resolve a cannabis-related dispute, right? Arbitration, mediation, or negotiation. And the mediator or the conflict resolution expert like yourself would be the one to facilitate all three. So can we talk about what is a cannabis mediator then? Like, what are the skill sets someone like you would have, or what does the cannabis mediator bring to the table that many other professionals wouldn't have?
So what a cannabis mediator brings to the table is, like, I could specifically speak for me, because I think I'm one of many that catapulted the cannabis mediation. Particularly, I've seen now attorneys popping up saying they're cannabis attorneys now. So of course the mediation is going to follow right behind that. So the skill set, I actually went to Steva University they're in a park in Orlando, Florida. And I went to that particular university, and they trained me on seeding. You learn about the different laws on the cannabis. You learn about the hydroponic system, which is more of a water system where you actually grow the plant in water versus you actually growing it in the ground outside. You learn about the canopy, how the light measures over the canopy of the plant. You learn about harvesting, like when it's a good time to harvest. You learn about the different strains of cannabis out there. So going into that university and learning all those different things, like when to open up a dispensary. Is this state a good state to open up a dispensary because of the different laws? So they help educate you in that. So what I did is I took the knowledge I got from Steva University, and I combined that with my mediation certification and arbitration certification that I got trained from the court system, and I combined them both to create a certified cannabis mediator. So that lets the cannabis industry know that, hey, Joseph George is trained in your industry and he understands what you're doing in your industry, so I could aid you in your industry with your disputes, because I understand from seeding in the ground, the extracting process, I've been in different labs, watching the different process in the labs. So that helps me to say, hey, I understand. Let's sit down. Let me resolve your dispute.
Then what is so specific about cannabis mediation?
What's specific about cannabis mediation is because the cannabis industry, their disputes is a little bit unique, but it's still the same to other industries too. So, but what they like is the confidentiality of the process, being that they don't want too many things to be in the public eye. They may have a private investor. Let's say it could be like a big company that doesn't do cannabis, but they want to be a silent partner because of their specific brand. So, but they'll invest into a cannabis industry, but they don't want to tarnish their original brand. So if they was to go to litigation, they'll end up in the court system, whereas if the opposing party decides to do a deposition and pull all those paperwork, that could pull that company's information into court, which becomes public knowledge. So the cannabis industry loves the ADR and the mediation and arbitration process because of the confidentiality. And even though it's still confidential, some of them still make you sign an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, just the extra layer of security for them to have. But the process is a lot better for them. They have contract dispute, which is a breach of contract. They have eminent domain. They have landlord and tenant, because even though people may see that they're growing the plants on the land, that particular person may not own the land. They may be leasing the land from somebody else to grow on the land. They may have a indoor facility where they have an indoor grow house. So with their indoor grow house, the building might be leased to them. So you have the landlord and tenant dispute. So you still have certain things that's related to other industries. But again, because of the different laws, the court system may not want to hear a particular case. So mediation or arbitration is the best tool to help them resolve those disputes.
So, Joseph, what are some common disputes you typically see or you encounter in cannabis mediation?
I've seen I've seen where a particular person actually had a survey company, went out and surveyed his land. And when the survey company surveyed the land, I guess he did a great job or whatever paperwork he got from the city. And they end up growing half of the cannabis on federal land, because they saw the land next door was open, but they never know who owned the land, because the government don't really state that they own certain land. So the guy ended up growing particularly on this federal land. And of course, the federal government step in and say, hey, you're growing cannabis on our land. So with that dispute, it became between the survey company, the city, and the company. But, it got resolved because he showed a documentation that where he got it from the survey company stating that this was where his boundary line started. So between him and the survey company, they resolved the dispute where the survey company paid the fines that they got from the government, and of course pay certain things out to that particular company. Some things is confidential, so I can't get into the specifics. But that's particularly one of those weird ones that people have to know and do their homework on when they're going into the cannabis industry. If you're going to have land, you got to do your homework on what land you actually have. And of course, with eminent domain, if the government sees that your land is needed to build a highway, that's where something comes into play. And sometimes mediation would come into play, but like I explained to people all the time too, sometimes you may want to go and get an attorney that knows eminent domain, because eminent domain is a really tricky part of the law, and ain't too many attorneys out there that does eminent domain. But construction is another one where lien notices get put on the property after the GC, which is the general contractor, builds the building out, to the specific of what the tenant wants. And then after the GC is done, he doesn't get paid. So then he has obligation, especially in Florida, to put a lien notice on the property. Once he put a lien on the property, they can't do nothing with that property. They can't do anything because it's on that lien. So they have to pay this guy until that lien gets removed, which he would have to give them a lien letter to release the lien from the property.
Wow, this is all very interesting. And I know that we shouldn't be advising on the law here, but I understand that given the complicated legal status of the particular thing we're discussing, the cannabis, can you please tell us what are the challenges in this industry legal-wise?
Legal-wise, the challenges that the cannabis industry faces is, I would say the biggest one is state and federal laws. That's the biggest one that faces them, because you have the states have their own particular laws, and then you have the federal government that mandates it. Because again, cannabis is still a Schedule I substance. So until the federal government removes that status, then you're going to have the states and the federal government fighting. So it makes it very hard for companies who have multiple businesses in different states, because with every state, they have to treat every state as separately. So they can't market their business like they would, let's say, in Detroit or Florida versus New York, which New York is actually opening up a lot of laws for the cannabis industry in New York, versus Florida is still a little bit restrictive on certain things. And then you have what they call, each state issues a different amount of licenses per year for the cannabis industry. So I think Florida, I'm not too sure, don't quote me on it, but I think Florida only released, I think, 20 or 30 something licenses per year. So every state is different when it comes to releasing these licenses. So that's why you don't see so many cannabis business popping up everywhere, because of the licensing. I think they range somewhere around anywhere from $100,000 to $200 and something thousand. So the licenses itself is expensive to get. So that's another challenge in the industry. The other challenge for the industry is the banking. You still have the financial institution that governs the banks is still not fully recognizing cannabis. So the banks are still trying to figure things out on how these people could put money in the bank. I think it's only like maybe one or two banks right now that's working through the cannabis industry to see how they could figure it out and do something for the cannabis industry. So those right there is the biggest issue right now for the cannabis industry.
Yeah, so this is a fast moving and evolving industry in many ways. The whole cannabis thing and how the laws are changing all across the country, and then how mediation is now catching up and now trying to address the concerns of people outside of court. So much to be seen, as things keep changing. And so we're definitely going to need to have you back as we see the different phases develop over the next months and years. Okay, so it's always a good thing to talk to you about this topic because you have your thumb on the pulse of this industry in ways that Natalia and we don't. Look, I've never participated or partaken in any kind of substance like that. So I can only imagine, that what I saw happening in California when I was out there months ago, a couple of years back, there were shops left and right, okay, dealing.
California is what we call the easy state to open up a cannabis business. It's easy in California, and California, what we call California and Michigan is the states that sets the tone for the rest of the country. Everybody expected Florida because it's a sunshine state, perfect state for growing it, but it's coming. You have cannabis industry, associations that's popping up in Florida that's actually moving it. And especially like right now, the cannabis industry is a $13.4 billion industry. And they're expecting by 2025 that the cannabis industry is going to be like $33.6 billion industry. So it's coming right up there with makeup.
There you go. And government's going to want to get their hands in it so they can start taxing it more and more, right? Because it's going to be.
Oh, they do that right now. Yeah, they do that right now. Right now, I think Florida, I think it's up in somewhere to I think $200 and something million in tax plus licensing fees from cannabis industry alone. So it's big money for the government, even though they still criticize the industry, but they're making a lot more money off of cannabis than a lot of other things that they would expect to make money off of.
Well, just like cigarettes, how much money does the government make off those taxes? But look, we'll see what happens in Texas. Things are constantly evolving. And Natalia, any last words?
Yes, absolutely. About Poland, we only have medical cannabis. This is the only thing that you can do here, and it's also very strictly regulated upon prescription from a medical doctor. Apart from that, it's illegal, both having it, trading it, or trafficking it. And it's very strict. A lot of young people get caught and have trouble. And having said that, I do believe that there will be a lot to say about how this will be changing. And it will be good to have you back. It's good to have you here, Mac. And having it so truly internationally covered, and that will be the end of our topic today, the Cannabis Mediation Basics with Mediator Joseph George. See you next time.
And Joseph, one last thing. I didn't see, we missed putting your website on the video. Could you give it one more time, please?
It's www.georgeandgeorgeadr.com.
Say it one more time. It's georgeandgeorgeadr.com.
Yes.
Yes. georgeandgeorgeadr.com. All right, man. Thanks so much. We'll check you out later. All right. Take care.
Okay. Thank you so much.